Mason used to be the fastest boy on the soccer field. Every day after school, he would race his friends across the playground, kicking the ball and laughing louder than anyone else. But that all changed one Saturday afternoon. During a soccer game at the school tournament, Mason chased the ball too close to the edge of the field. A taller player from the other team tripped him by accident. Mason fell hard. His back hit the ground with a loud thud. He tried to get up, but his legs didn't move. The crowd went silent. Coaches ran over. An ambulance took him away while he stared at the sky, confused and scared. Doctors later told him he had a spinal injury. It wasn't permanent, but it was serious. He would need physical therapy and a lot of help to walk again. Mason didn't believe them at first. He thought he'd be back to normal in a few days, but weeks passed. He couldn't even stand on his own. His mother, Claire, cried a lot at night when she thought he was asleep. She tried to stay strong in front of him. Her new husband, Marcus, did most of the work at home. Marcus was quiet, calm, and always wearing the same gray tracksuit. He had short black hair and a soft voice. Mason never called him Dad to him. Marcus was just someone his mom married. Someone who didn't belong. Marcus started taking Mason to therapy sessions. He lifted Mason into the car every morning and helped him into the wheelchair. Mason never said thank you. He sat in silence, staring out the window. He hated how his legs didn't work. He hated asking for help. And most of all, he hated being seen with Marcus, especially when they passed people from school. One afternoon, Marcus surprised Mason with something new. He had built wooden bars in the garage to help Mason practice walking. Mason frowned. "What is this supposed to be?" Marcus smiled. "Just give it a try. One step at a time." Mason rolled his eyes. "This won't help. I'm stuck like this." But Marcus didn't leave. He helped Mason into the leg braces. Mason, in his school uniform, stood between the bars while Marcus held him steady. His blonde hair fell into his eyes as he struggled to move. His legs felt like heavy blocks. Sweat dripped down his face even after just a few seconds. "I can't," he whispered. "I'm too tired." Marcus didn't push him. He simply said, "Then rest. We'll try again tomorrow." And they did. Every day. Even when Mason yelled. Even when he cried. Even when he begged to stop, Marcus stayed by his side. He never raised his voice. He never walked away. He just kept showing up. At school, kids asked Mason why he wore braces on his legs. "Injury," he said quickly. They didn't know how much it hurt him to walk even a few steps. They didn't know about the man in the gray tracksuit who stayed up late reading about physical therapy, or how he carried Mason to bed every night without a word. But Mason didn't talk about Marcus. Not to his teachers, not to his friends, not to anyone. To the world, Marcus was just part of the background. And that was how Mason liked it. But deep inside, something had started to change. It was small, quiet, like a seed buried under snow. And Marcus, he saw it too. Marcus never missed a single session in the garage. Every afternoon after finishing his janitor shift at the school, he came home, washed up, and helped Mason get into his braces. Mason had stopped arguing, but he still didn't say much. He followed instructions, took slow steps between the wooden bars, and collapsed onto the bench when it was over. Claire often watched from the kitchen window. She didn't interfere. She knew Marcus had a calm way about him that Mason didn't understand yet. Marcus didn't rush. He didn't push too hard. He simply showed up day after day. One evening, Mason stood between the bars longer than usual. His arms shook from the effort. Marcus stood close behind in case he lost balance. Mason gritted his teeth, dragging one leg forward then the other. "You're doing it," Marcus said, not too loud, not too excited, just steady. Mason didn't reply, but he didn't stop either. For the first time, he finished a full walk from one end of the bars to the other. Afterwards, they sat in silence. Mason breathed heavily, wiping sweat off his forehead. "Why do you care so much?" he asked suddenly. Marcus looked at him. "Because you matter," he said simply. Mason didn't answer. He just looked down at his shoes. The next day, Marcus brought something new, a walking frame. "You're ready," he said. Mason stared at it, unsure. "I'm not," he replied. "Yes, you are," Marcus said. "You don't have to be perfect. Just try." They started with short steps in the garage. Then Marcus helped him practice on the sidewalk outside. Some neighbors waved. Mason felt awkward, like everyone was watching. "Let them look," Marcus said. "You're stronger than they think." A few days later at school, Mason used the frame instead of the wheelchair. He wore his braces under his pants, hoping no one would notice. Kids turned to stare as he walked into the hallway slowly. He hated the attention. At lunch, one boy asked, "What happened to your legs?" Mason mumbled, "Injury, still healing." "Who's helping you walk again?" Another kid asked. Mason paused. He thought about saying, "My mom's husband." But something in him still wasn't ready. "Just someone," he replied, "like a therapist or something." Marcus came by that afternoon to mop the hallway floors. He wore the same gray tracksuit. Mason saw him down the hall but quickly turned away when his friends came over. One of them nodded toward Marcus. "Who's that?" "Just the janitor," Mason said without thinking. He didn't look back to see if Marcus heard, but he did. That night at dinner, Marcus was quieter than usual. He didn't mention what he'd heard. Claire noticed the silence and tried to fill the space with light talk. Mason ate quickly and went to his room. Alone in bed, Mason stared at the ceiling. Guilt pressed on his chest. He remembered how Marcus had helped him every single day. How he'd held him up when his legs gave out. How he never complained, not once. And now Mason had called him just the janitor. He didn't know how to fix it, but he knew something had to change. Marcus wasn't just a background figure. He wasn't just his mom's husband, and he definitely wasn't just anything. He was the reason Mason had taken his first step again. The next morning, Mason didn't speak much during breakfast. He kept his eyes on his cereal bowl, stirring it more than eating. Marcus sat across from him, quiet as usual. Claire tried to make small talk, but the air felt heavy. When it was time to leave, Marcus helped Mason into the car like always. Neither said a word during the ride. At school, Mason used his walking frame and braces again. Some students gave him thumbs up, others stayed out of his way. He still hated the attention. When his best friend, Jake, walked beside him to class, he asked, "Hey, is it true that your stepdad works here?" Mason hesitated. "Yeah, he just cleans up and stuff." "Oh, I saw him once pushing the mop cart," Jake said, shrugging. "He seems nice." Mason didn't reply. He kept walking. That afternoon, Marcus came to pick Mason up as usual. While waiting near the entrance, he saw two boys laughing and pointing at him. Mason saw it too. The boys weren't being loud, but their whispers were enough. One nudged the other and said, "Is that your dad or the janitor?" Mason didn't answer. He just looked down and pretended not to hear. Marcus said nothing during the drive home. In the garage later that evening, Mason strapped on his braces and stood between the bars. He was stronger now. His steps were firmer. He could move across the space without falling. Marcus clapped gently. "Look at you, walking without me holding your arm," he said with a small smile. Mason didn't smile back. "Do you hate me?" he asked. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why would I hate you?" "Because, at school, when people ask about you, I don't say the truth." Marcus leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "You mean when you call me the janitor?" Mason looked away, embarrassed. "I didn't mean it to be rude. I just didn't want them to think I was weird." "You think having someone care about you is weird?" Marcus asked softly. "No, but they wouldn't get it," Mason muttered. "They'd just say stuff. They'd joke. I didn't want that." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand, Mason. Being different at your age feels like the worst thing in the world. But hiding the truth doesn't make it go away." Mason looked up. "So, you're not mad?" "No," Marcus said. "But I want you to think about something. If you're ashamed of the people who help you, what does that say about who you want to be? Mason didn't know how to answer that. Later that night, Claire found Mason sitting on the porch alone. She sat beside him, pulling her sweater tight. "You've been quiet lately." "Yeah," Mason replied. "Is it about Marcus?" she asked gently. Mason nodded. "I think I messed up." "Marcus never expects anything from you," Claire said. "But he gives everything. He was the only one who believed you could walk again when even the doctors weren't sure." Mason sighed. "I know, and I made him feel invisible." Claire placed her hand on his. "Then maybe it's time to make things right." That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the way Marcus stood by him, even when he didn't have to. Even when he got nothing in return. He decided he couldn't keep hiding anymore. It was time to let people know who Marcus really was. The next morning, Mason woke up earlier than usual. He sat on the edge of his bed, looking down at his leg braces. Something felt different. He didn't feel as angry as before. Instead, he felt nervous. Today, he wanted to try something he had never done at school. He wanted to tell the truth. He got ready slowly. Claire helped him adjust his school uniform over the braces. Marcus stood nearby, holding his walking frame. "You good?" Marcus asked. Mason nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm ready." At school, things started as usual. Students rushed through the hallways. Mason walked carefully, gripping his frame. He passed a few classmates who gave him polite smiles. Some whispered things he couldn't hear. During lunch, Mason sat with Jake and two other boys. They were talking about the school's soccer team tryouts. One of the boys, Ben, asked, "You used to be on the team, right? Are you going to try again?" "I might," Mason replied. "But I'll need more time." "Who's helping you train?" Jake asked, taking a bite of the sandwich. Mason looked down at his tray, thinking for a second. Then he said clearly, "My stepdad, Marcus." Jake blinked. "The janitor guy?" "Yeah," Mason said. "He's also my stepdad. He's the reason I'm walking again." The table went quiet. Ben looked surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," Mason said again. "He built a whole rehab setup at home. Helped me every single day. Without him, I'd still be in a wheelchair." "That's actually kind of cool," Jake said. Mason shrugged. "He doesn't talk much, but he shows up. Always." After lunch, Mason had a physical therapy session in the school gym. His coach asked him to walk across a short section of the room. Marcus was there, standing off to the side like always. This time, Mason didn't ignore him. He waved. A teacher standing nearby noticed. "Is that your father?" she asked politely. "My stepdad," Mason said with a small smile. "He's the reason I'm improving." Marcus raised his eyebrows when he heard that. He didn't say anything, but a proud look crossed his face. Later, as school ended, Mason walked with his frame toward the car. Two girls from his class passed him. One whispered, "Isn't that the janitor?" Mason turned around and spoke loudly enough for them to hear. "He's my stepdad." They didn't reply, just walked away quietly. In the car, Marcus glanced at Mason. "You okay?" "Yeah," Mason said. "I told some people about you." Marcus looked surprised. "You did?" "I just thought they should know," Mason said, staring out the window. "I've been unfair." Marcus smiled slightly. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Mason said. "It's the truth." That evening at home, Claire hugged Mason tightly. "Marcus told me what you said. He's really proud of you." Mason felt a bit shy. "I should have said it a long time ago." They all sat down for dinner. This time, Mason didn't rush through his food or stay silent. They talked, laughed a little, and for the first time, things felt normal. Later, Mason stood between the bars in the garage again. He took a deep breath and walked without help from his arms. Step by step, he made it across. "You did it," Marcus said, clapping once. Mason turned and smiled. "We did." Mason's progress was faster now. He didn't just walk between the bars anymore. He could walk short distances without the frame. He still needed his leg braces, but every step felt stronger. At school, students had stopped whispering. Some even cheered him on when they saw him in the hallway. Things were changing. One day, Mason's gym teacher announced soccer tryouts. The whole class turned to look at Mason. He felt the pressure instantly. After class, Jake asked, "You thinking about it?" Mason gave a small nod. "Maybe. I want to try." At home, he told Marcus about the tryouts. "It's 2 weeks away. Think I'll be ready?" Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter and nodded. "If we keep working, I think you'll surprise yourself." They trained harder than ever. Every evening after school, Mason and Marcus worked in the garage and in the backyard. Marcus made new practice tools from old wood and ropes. They worked on balance, strength, and footwork. Some days were frustrating, but Mason didn't give up. One night, after a long session, Mason sat on the back porch. His legs ached, but he smiled. Claire brought out 2 glasses of lemonade and handed one to Marcus. "You two make a good team," she said. Marcus looked at Mason. "You've come a long way." "I couldn't have done it without you," Mason said. He meant it this time. Marcus nodded, touched by the words. A few days later, something unexpected happened. The school called Mason and his parents to the office. The principal greeted them with a warm smile. "We're organizing a small documentary project. It's about student stories, people who've overcome something difficult. Your name came up, Mason." Mason's eyes widened. "Me?" The principal nodded. "We'd like to record a short video of your journey. Talk about your injury, your recovery, and who helped you most." Mason looked at Marcus. "Okay, sure." The video team came 2 days later. They'd filmed Mason at school, in the gym, and even at home. They recorded his exercises in the garage, his walks in the backyard, and quiet moments where Marcus helped him stretch. Mason told them everything: how the injury happened, how hard it was at first, and how Marcus believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. At the end of the interview, one of the students behind the camera asked, "So who was the biggest reason you kept going?" Mason didn't pause. "My stepdad, Marcus. He's the reason I'm walking. He's the reason I'm standing here today." They played the video during school assembly that Friday. The whole auditorium watched in silence as Mason's story played on the big screen. Some students gasped when they saw how bad the injury was. Others watched closely as Marcus helped Mason through every step of recovery. When the video ended, students clapped. A few stood. Mason sat in the front row, blushing. Marcus stood in the back of the room, quiet as always, but this time people looked at him differently. After the assembly, students came up to Mason. "That was amazing," one girl said. "Your stepdad's awesome," another added. Mason smiled. "Yeah, he is." One boy even walked up to Marcus. "Thanks for helping him. That was real." Marcus nodded kindly. He did most of the work. As they left the school building together, Mason walked next to Marcus, no longer hiding, no longer embarrassed. This time he was proud. Proud of his steps, proud of the truth, proud of the man who never gave up on him. And somewhere deep inside, Marcus was proud too. Not because people finally noticed, but because Mason finally did. The day of the soccer tryouts finally arrived. Mason stood in front of the mirror dressed in his practice gear. His braces were hidden under long socks, but he could still feel them with every step. Claire kissed his forehead before he left. "No matter what happens, we're proud of you," she said. Marcus stood by the front door holding Mason's soccer bag. "Ready?" he asked. Mason took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." At the school field, a group of boys had already started stretching. Some looked over as Mason arrived, surprised to see him. Coach Reynolds blew the whistle and called everyone in. "Glad to see you here, Mason," the coach said. "Do what you can. Show us your heart." Mason nodded and joined the line. At first, the drills were hard. He wasn't as fast as the others. His legs felt heavy, and he had to concentrate on every movement. But he kept going. Marcus watched from the side quietly, arms crossed, eyes following every step. During a water break, One boy whispered, "He shouldn't be out here." Another replied, "You saw the video, right? He's tough." Mason heard both comments, but he focused on the ball. Then came the passing drill. Mason teamed up with Jake, and together, they moved the ball up the field. Mason's kicks weren't the strongest, but they were accurate. He didn't miss once. His legs wobbled a little when he ran, but he didn't fall. Finally, the coach called for a short scrimmage match. Mason joined the second team. At first, he stayed back and watched the play. Then the ball rolled near him. He didn't think he moved. He kicked it cleanly to a teammate, who then scored. Everyone clapped. Marcus nodded from the sidelines. After the tryout, Mason limped toward Marcus, exhausted but smiling. "I did it," he said, out of breath. "You did more than that," Marcus replied. "You finished. Strong." A few days later, the team list was posted. Mason walked slowly to the bulletin board with a group of students. His name was there. He turned around and grinned. Jake gave him a high five. "Told you you'd make it." That evening, Claire made his favorite dinner. Mason sat at the table, shining with pride. "They put me on the team. Maybe not as a starter, but I'm in." "They made the right choice," Marcus said. Later that night, Mason walked into the garage where Marcus was cleaning up the workout area. Mason stood near the bars, the same bars he once clung to just to stay upright. "I've been thinking," Mason said. "About what?" Marcus asked. "How I treated you at the start. How I told people you were just the janitor." Marcus didn't say anything. Mason looked up. "I was scared. Scared of what people would think. Scared of being different. But you never let me quit. Even when I was rude. Even when I didn't say thank you." Marcus finally spoke. "You didn't have to say thank you, Mason. I saw it in your effort. Every time you stood up again, that was enough." Mason stepped forward and hugged Marcus for the first time. "Well, I'm saying it now." Marcus hugged him back, quietly, tightly. They stood in the garage, surrounded by the tools of recovery, wooden bars, braces, and sweat-stained towels, everything that brought them closer. Mason had walked again. He had faced his fears, and now he was walking towards something more, a real bond. One built not by blood, but by effort, trust, and love. A week after Mason made the soccer team, the school held a parent night. Students were invited to bring their families to meet the teachers and coaches. There would be speeches, awards, and even a small video presentation for parents who hadn't seen the earlier student assembly. Mason wasn't sure he wanted to go at first. "What if people still look at me weird?" he asked Claire. "They won't," she said. "And even if they do, they'll see the truth now." Marcus stayed quiet, cleaning his work boots by the front door. Mason looked over at him. "You'll come too, right?" Marcus nodded. "Only if you want me there." Mason replied quickly, "I do." That night, the school gym filled with students, parents, and teachers. The lights were bright, and rows of chairs were set up in front of a large screen. Mason walked in slowly, using only his braces now, no frame. Marcus walked beside him, dressed in a clean button-up shirt instead of his usual gray tracksuit. As they found their seats, a few students waved at Mason. One teacher smiled and said, "We're all proud of you." Marcus stayed quiet, his hands folded in his lap. The principal stepped up to the microphone and welcomed everyone. After some introductions, she said, "We'd like to share a story that touched all of us. A story about strength, recovery, and unexpected heroes." The lights dimmed. Mason's video began playing. Images of him in the wheelchair, then walking between the bars, training with Marcus, and finally trying out for soccer. There were scenes of Marcus helping him up, wiping sweat from his forehead, and watching him proudly. Mason looked over at Marcus. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his jaw was tight. Claire reached over and gently squeezed his hand. When the video ended, the room clapped loudly. Some people stood and clapped even harder. The principal returned to the mic. "Mason's journey reminded us that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. Marcus, would you please come forward?" Marcus froze. "Me?" Mason stood up, smiling. Go, you deserve this. Hesitant at first, Marcus walked to the front. The clapping grew louder. He looked nervous but nodded his thanks. When the principal handed him a small plaque that read, "Thank you for being a true hero," the whole room cheered. After the event, parents and teachers came up to Marcus. "You did an amazing thing," one said. "Your story is powerful," another added. Mason stood nearby, watching proudly. Then he noticed two boys from school talking quietly. One pointed at Marcus and asked the other, "Isn't that just the janitor?" Mason walked straight over. "He's not just anything," he said firmly. "He's my stepdad, and he's the reason I'm standing here." The boys looked surprised, then nodded and walked away. Marcus had heard it. He turned to Mason and smiled a little. "You didn't have to say that." "Yeah," Mason replied, "but I wanted to." As they walked to the car later that night, Mason didn't need help getting in. He moved slower than most, but he moved strong. Marcus started the car, looking over at Mason. "You're becoming quite the speaker." Mason chuckled. "Guess I got it from someone who never says much but shows everything." They drove home in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, full of meaning. Mason had once hidden the truth. Now he told it proudly. And the man he once called just the janitor was now the person he respected most in the world. Mason's first game with the soccer team was finally here. He had been practicing every day with the team and working even harder at home. He wasn't a starting player yet, but the coach promised he would get a few minutes on the field. That was enough for Mason. Just a chance to play again was a big deal. Marcus helped him get ready. He tied Mason's cleats, adjusted the leg braces, and handed him his team jersey. "You look like a real player," Marcus said. Mason smiled. "Feels like it too." They drove to the school field. The bleachers were full of parents, students, and teachers. Claire saved front row seats for herself and Marcus. She waved as Mason joined his team near the bench. The game started, and Mason watched carefully. The ball moved fast, players shouted to each other, and the crowd clapped after every goal attempt. Coach Reynolds walked over in the second half and said, "You ready, Mason?" "Ready," Mason said without thinking twice. Marcus leaned forward in his seat, watching closely as Mason stepped onto the field. The crowd got quiet for a second. People whispered. Some remembered the video. Some had only heard the story. Now they were seeing it. Mason took his position on the wing. When the ball came his way, he didn't rush. He tapped it gently, then passed it to a teammate. A minute later, he ran toward the goal area. His legs were slower than the others, but they were steady. The ball came back to him again. This time, he turned and kicked it hard toward the center. One of his teammates caught it and scored. The crowd cheered. Mason looked toward the bench. Coach clapped. His teammates gave him high fives. But Mason only looked at one person, Marcus, standing in the front row, clapping slowly, his eyes full of pride. After the game, the team surrounded Mason. "Nice pass," one said. "You're really part of the team now," another added. Mason laughed, breathing hard. "Thanks." As the players went to the locker room, a local news reporter walked over. "Mason, do you have a second?" Mason nodded, a little surprised. "You've inspired a lot of people," the reporter said. "Is there anything you want to say to others who are struggling?" Mason thought for a moment. "Yeah, don't give up, even when it's hard, and don't be afraid to accept help." "Who helped you the most?" she asked. Mason looked straight into the camera. "My stepdad, Marcus. Everyone calls him the janitor, but to me, he's the reason I can walk, run, and play again." The next day, the short interview clip went online. Teachers showed it in class. The school posted it on their website. Comments poured in. Students shared it. Strangers even stopped Marcus at school to shake his hand. Mason walked taller now, not just because of his recovery, but because he carried no more shame. He had told the world the truth. One evening as the sun set, Mason and Marcus sat in the backyard. "You proud of yourself?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Mason said. But I'm more proud that people finally see you the way I do." Marcus looked at him with quiet joy. "And how do you see me?" "Not just as a janitor. Not just my mom's husband," Mason said. "I see you as my dad." Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Mason had once been broken, physically and emotionally. But now he stood strong, supported by love, effort, and a man who chose to stay when he could have walked away. And that made all the difference.